وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. So all praise belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Lord of the heavens and the worlds, and peace and salutations be upon Sayyidina Muhammad and upon his family and companions. So inshallah, I think all the people have watched this up to the last session that we did, apart from I think one sister who mentioned she's not seen them all, but that's not a problem. Inshallah, you can watch it afterwards. So last lesson, we looked at values and the importance of having the correct values in our life. And we also looked at prioritizing our values as well. So we looked at, for example, this is an example we looked at. I've taken a lot of the slides out of this one. I'm just going over everything. We looked at, for example, what are what's the criteria for deciding our values. So we mentioned, we shouldn't just look at what is pleasing to us or what is painful to us in terms of experience wise, but we should also look at those things which, what the criteria should be is the values which fulfill all our needs. Sorry, just can you hold the line 1 second, please? Sorry. Sorry about that. Just had a problem. So we looked at what is the criteria for values. Can you hear me, everyone?
Yeah, we can hear you fine, Hamza.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So we said that also the criteria for prioritizing our values we looked at as well. So we mentioned, for example, we also looked at what the difference between a means value and ends value. So we said that the means value is the vehicle to attain the ends value, and so we mentioned that the ends value is like a need which we're trying to fulfill, and so in essence this value here is the need, whatever need we have, and this is just the vehicle to fulfill that need. So this is like the priority. So for example, we mentioned, look here, if you look, it says what are your priorities and core values. Priorities are these things here. These are the priorities, and the actual values are these things here. So that's what it means. So when people prioritize family, they're not prioritizing family, they're prioritizing the value that the family gives them, for example. And one thing I just wanted to mention, if you remember in the beginning, I mentioned in the beginning sessions, we talked about needs and desires, and we mentioned that people are fulfilling their needs and desires in positive or negative way. So that we got them to think in the beginning, and we also asked them to look at what are their priorities in the order of their priorities as well. So now what we're doing is we're correcting the values and the order of the values. What we're doing is we're fulfilling their needs, helping them to fulfill their needs in a better way. So the reason why I'm mentioning this is very important to start linking everything together. Even when we, for example, covered beliefs, there's linked to fulfilling their needs, because when we looked at limiting beliefs, we looked at how they were fulfilling their needs in a destructive way. So, and then we tried to change their values as well. So, sometimes people's values actually change through circumstances and life events as well. So, for example, if someone has a child, they value family more than work, for example. Okay, so we looked at this if you remember, we looked at this last session, and we mentioned, in terms of the criteria for prioritizing our values, and we mentioned that the values related to the purpose should be given top priority, and these are like the values related to spiritual needs. And I think what someone asked a question, this is what I want to actually, for the first maybe 15-20 minutes, I just want to mention a few things regarding this. And someone asked what do we mean when we say values related to spiritual needs? So I just want to discuss this briefly, well, maybe 15-20 minutes. And like I said, this is not a session that we're going to teach people, but it's more for our understanding and clarity. because we might be asked sometimes we might be asked certain questions, and if we're not clear ourselves, we won't be able to answer the people, the students properly. We might be confused ourselves, or so. Spiritual need, in essence, what it is when there's no need, if need or desire related to the body, mind, and heart or soul. So it's done for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without any need. And in fact, it requires a person to sacrifice their needs and desires to fulfill that spiritual need. So for example, the 4 objectives of the tariq, in essence, this is what it is. The preference to the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by controlling one's desire, and to give preference to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam by choosing his way over other ways, and to have compassion upon creation, physical and spiritually, and to be in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are all the spiritual needs of a person. So what I've done here, I've kind of like broken it down further. So the spiritual needs, I've put them into these 2 categories. So
Assalamu alaikum. Can I just ask a question on the spiritual need, brother Yasir? So say like, for example, you've got a non-Muslim sitting there, and what would you say to them then? Because obviously to a Muslim it's understandable. How would a non-Muslim understand this?
Well, obviously we are coming from the point of view of obviously that the Islamic beliefs are the correct beliefs. So obviously that's the angle we're coming from. It doesn't mean when we're teaching this from when we say we're teaching this from a more of a Western perspective as well, it doesn't mean that we're completely discarding all our teachings. So we're still giving them giving the Islamic teachings as well at the same time. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, inshallah, this will be made more clearer, your question, when we look at the next session. But very briefly, we're gonna look at, for example, the covenant that we took prior to coming to this world, and mention that this was something that was universally taken by everyone. So it wasn't just Muslims that took it; it was non-Muslims as well. So it's all the spirit. So the spiritual needs is not just specific to Muslims. It's actually for every single human being. So from that angle, we can show them as well. But inshallah, I think your question hopefully will be answered once we go on, when we cover the next session as well. But I think, so what we're trying to do is we are trying to give the teachings from like a Western perspective and secular perspective as well. But at the same time, we are trying to correct their misunderstandings as well. So so inshallah, that's what it is. But obviously it doesn't mean that we're going to leave our teachings or whatever we believe as true. We're going to and if a non-Muslim attends, alhamdulillah, attends, he might get curious and might want to learn more as a result. But our main obviously priority is going to be the Muslims that we're teaching. So is that okay, sister?
Jazakallah, yeah.
So this physical, sorry, some question. Oh, so the physical, the spiritual needs are broken down, like using the 4 objectives even more. So the rights of Allah and the Messenger, peace be upon him, and compassion upon creation. So this is spiritual and physical. So when we say, for example, rights of Allah and His Messenger, this means like prayer, fasting, etc., etc. So obviously when a person is praying, at that time he's sacrificing the needs of the body and the desires, etc. Likewise when he's fasting. So these are like rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fasting in Ramadan. So for example, when he's fasting, and he's trained not to think about anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is curbing the desires as well. Then after that, you have compassion upon creation. So this also requires sacrificing the needs. So reason why because for example, as an example, like valuing, if I have the value of serving parents, this is related to spiritual need, because sometimes a person, for example, I give you an example, like once there was a companion, and the Prophet ﷺ, he wanted to go to jihad, and the Prophet ﷺ said, have you got parents at home? And he said yes. He said, go serve them, that's your jihad. So that was the greater sacrifice for that Sahabi, as opposed to going out in jihad. So meaning that he had to sacrifice his needs and desires to serve his parents. So going against what a person wants, whatever, and that is when the spiritual need is fulfilled. So in essence, the Prophet ﷺ was guiding that companion to adopt that value, which was linked to fulfilling his spiritual need. And so, like for example, I could go on a Jamaat or, expedition, but it might be, for example, for my personal fulfillment, might be because I want to go, I might want to go sightseeing, etc. So the priority should be the value is not for the outward action, is when the person sacrifices his desire. So that in that instance, it was to fulfill the rights of the parents. So when a person is so another thing I want to mention in regards to the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that the most important thing here, number one, that's why it's written number one, is the rights of Allah and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's even more than compassion upon creation. So because some people have this misconception, they think that rights of creation is the most important. Allah's rights are not that important. Allah's Ghafur Rahim. Yes, Allah's Ghafur Rahim and can forgive his own rights, but it doesn't mean that the rights of Allah and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam are not more important. They are more important, but it's the rights of other creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't forgive until that other person forgives. So that's the difference. So out of his mercy, he can forgive his own rights. So the top box, the spiritual needs, this is the order. So you have the rights of Allah, and then you have the compassion upon creation. So when a person is fulfilling the rights of creation, so physical and spiritual needs, this is like fulfilling his own spiritual needs, because this is when the spirit is growing. And these two things here are related to the purpose of life. So you see a purpose, all linked. This is related to the purpose of life because the reason why it's related to the purpose of life is because the purpose of our existence in reality is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and second is to convey the message. So when a person is engaged in these two acts, conveying worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and conveying the message, this is when he's fulfilling the purpose of life. So this is like personal worship and ibadah and dawah to the creation. So this is like the two objectives of the path as well, steadfastness on yourself and inviting other creation as well. So this is done. These things are done even at the expense of one's own needs. So that's why you find, for example, companions, they left their work, families, to spread the message of Deen for this reason, and they even gave this ultimate sacrifice for this as well, the ultimate sacrifice, which is the life. And that's why Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani mentioned that the Deen is two things, Ta'zeem li amrillah and Shafaq al khalq. This is the reason why. And even amongst the compassion upon creation, you can argue that the compassion upon creation spiritually is higher than the physical, because obviously that is in relation to the hereafter, forever and ever. But the reason why the prophets or the Mashaykh, they focus on the physical needs first before the spiritual needs, because they were distracted. Because if someone is distracted by his physical needs, then obviously he's not going to be able to focus on his akhirah. So that's why they try to alleviate their physical problems first, and then they look at their spiritual needs. That's the reason why. But it's not because it's more important. It's because they need to get to that. That's like a means for that. So if you look at the top box again, the top priority is the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that's why you find the companions, when they used to compete, with one another in relation to these things, in relation to the purpose. They used to compete with one another. So, like for example, Hazrat Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhuma, both of them, they used to compete in obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. However, when it comes to the physical needs, it's better to give, like for example, these are the rights of my body, mind and heart. It's better to give preference to the creation. Yeah, so because this is like something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran as well, that they prefer others over themselves, even though they themselves are in need. So this is what it means. So you can find countless examples of this from the life of companions, where like Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, who had nothing, he gave everything away in the path of God. He had nothing left. And other companions as well. For example, when there was two companions, one was about to be shaheed, and he gave water to the companion. You all read these stories. So this is showing this come into play here. They were giving preference to the spiritual need over the physical needs. So that's the reason behind it, though. Why they did this, because that was fulfilling, that was in relation to the purpose of their life, and this was in relation to the physical needs. So now, if you break this down even further, I've just broken this down even more. So you have at the top, you have rights of Allah and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then you have serving creation. You have rights of the body, mind, and heart, and then you have recommended optional good deeds. And the reason why I mentioned this is because not every single spiritual action which is related to the spirit is a right of Allah and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, for example, you can have, for example, optional worship like nafil, fasting. These are not rights, but these are like extra optional actions that a person can do. And so, when it comes to the optional worship, then other creation rights come above this. So, for example, when dawah is preferred over nafli ibadah. Or another example is, for example, a sister, she wants to fast, an optional fast, but she needs to ask permission from her husband first, because rights of the husband comes first. So that's why the optional good deeds are lower down compared to the needs of the body, mind, and heart. So therefore, if like, for example, I'm just giving an example now. So for example, if you're if there's something to do with serving the creation, and you're giving priority to the optional good deeds, like, for example, you're praying, it's kind of like defeating the purpose, because the actual purpose of optional good deeds is so that your relationship with the creation can become better. So that's why, because this is like training to become better with the creation. So that's why when there's a clash between these two things, then a person should give preference to serving the creation. Because it defeats the purpose of the the nafli ibadah. However, when it comes to your own personal needs and rights, then the person should give preference to your own rights. And I'll give you an example of a hadith. When there's three men, they came to the Prophet ﷺ, and one said that when they asked about the Prophet ﷺ, and they found out that he used to sleep during the night and pray as well, and he married, and sometimes he fasted, and some days he didn't. So they said that one person said, I'm never ever going to eat again, I'm going to fast every day. The other one said, I'm never going to sleep at night, and the other one said, I'm never going to get married. So this, obviously, the Prophet ﷺ, he condemned them all, and the reason why this is because the body has rights as well, and that's why, for example, a person shouldn't sleep, like, for example, 2-3 hours, because it's violating the right of the body. So that's why this comes above. And in the previous nations, for example, these things were given preference to, like, for example, in the nation of Isa Islam. That's why you'd find, for example, people used to do excessive worship, fasting, and sometimes they would not get married as well. A lot of these monks, they'd go into seclusion for years and not get married. But in Islam, there's no concept of that. So preference should be given to the preference should be given to the nafli acts if there's no if the rights of the body is not violated. So, for example, this is like, for example, if your person is praying tahajjud, he can sacrifice his sleep, but not to the point that he's going to be harmed and he can't function during the day. For example, if he's praying all night and he can't function, then you shouldn't do that. So you can see, like, here, like, the optional ibadah is above the desires of the nafs. So one should sacrifice their desires and comfort to perform optional good deeds. And this is actually, in the Quran, it's mentioned, into the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned, "Oh, you wrapped in your clothes, stand all night in prayer, except a little. Pray half the night or a little less, or a little more, and recite the Quran properly in a measured way." So this is why it's actually saying that you should take rest and pray as well. So obviously these things I'm just briefly mentioning. I'm not going to go into detail because this is a big topic in itself. But this is actually obviously the ulama have already categorized these things in the books of fiqh, like farz, wajib, sunnah, mustahab. All these things have already been written in detail. But I'm just showing, the reason why I'm mentioning this is because even within, I'm showing like the priorities and the values and how like obviously Islam already has all these things inbuilt within it. Giving values, which things you should give priority to over others. So for example, the hadith when the Prophet mentions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, the most beloved things which my slave comes nearer to me is what I have enjoined him with. So first things. So these are the things. And then my slave keeps on coming closer to me through performing nawafil till I love him. So I become his sense of hearing with which he hears. So this is what it's talking about here. This the hadith. So this is the inshallah in terms of the order of priorities. I thought I'd just to clarify some of these things. This is for our own personal clarification, and so that we are more clear on the spiritual needs and also the other needs and in more detail. And when there's a clash, obviously we know ourselves which one we should give priority to. So in regards to the rights of Allah, now I want to mention something as well. Last time I didn't go into too much detail regarding this because we obviously the people that we're teaching, we're not going. That's not the purpose of the workshop. It's beyond the scope of the workshop to discuss these things. But again, for our own personal clarification and clarity, I'm just going to mention a few things regarding when it comes to the rights of Allah and how this relates to the means and ends value. So I've just put this table together so a person understands this with more clarity. So when I mentioned last time, and the means value is a value worship and the ends value is servitude. This in reality, the servitude isn't there's no kind of a need of the person as such, like meaning feeling that or worldly need that he has in the world, like a feeling or something that he needs to attain as such, because this person here, he's worshipping solely for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah, so it's not the same. This ends value is not the same as the other ends values which you mentioned before, like here. They're not the same thing. Yeah, but obviously we don't need to mention this to the other people. So so this is like a station, like like we say, for example, in the Miraj, for example, we talk about the Maqam Abdiya. So this is like more like a station a person reaches.
But Yasser, on this regard, we actually, if you look at the third stage purification course, I think which you're alluding to, and basically, like if you look at that diagram, the 4 states of man, and how do you become a state of blessing? Yeah. In fact, the end value is a servitude. In that case, he actually says that you're not working towards the end value, which is servitude, but rather servitude is a tool by which that you stay and achieve the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that could be explained in that way. What you're saying, it is, but here rather than being end value, it becomes a tool, because remember, in one of the 4 states, if you're in a state of obedience, then the one way to stay in blessings that it doesn't count against you, that you have to become you have to become humble and have humility. So it's a tool in which to get end value, which you're saying, mashallah, is the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah, mashallah. Jazakallah. That's another way we could also put that in as well. Yeah, jazakallah. Yeah, so the ends values, they're like means to the, like you mentioned, to the ultimate ends value. So these are means in themselves as well. So obviously these are means to this and these are means to this, like yourself mentioned. So the point I'm trying to make is that this is not like the other ones. So for example, here, for example, when we're showing here that another person, when he values worship, his end, like these other people, for example, when they're worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they have other objectives as well. So like when we talk about the non-objectives, so they have even though they're worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their ultimate ends value, it maybe is not Allah, but pleasure of Allah, or could be reward or paradise or whatever they have. And the other ends value that they have is, so for example, they're worshiping Allah for these things, but they want something else as well as a result. So for example, this is like a person wants, for example, enjoyment. For example, we mentioned that there's other non-objectives as well, or you might want, for example, he wants visions or other things. So even though he's worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but he has something, he's worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for a reason. Yeah, he's worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's what we mean by non-objectives here. And this person here who's worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's not worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at all. He's actually worshipping the nafs. Yeah, and so this is the difference in a non-objective and a wrong objective, is that this person is worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but he wants something else as well. This person who's worshipping for the ego, he's not even worshiping. It's like the hypocrite, for example. So he's worshipping the nafs, and his objective is completely wrong as well. So for example, when we talk about the path to hell. This is like the path to hell. Like his objective is completely wrong, Whereas these people, they're on the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they get sidetracked by their non-objectives. So there is a difference, and amongst these people, there's like varying degrees of people. So people, for example, they're not all the same, obviously, in terms of their ultimate end value. There's obviously a vast spectrum of people in that. Obviously, you can't cover everything, but just give an example here to show. And these people here, for example, the ones that worshipping, who have the ultimate ends value, which is the pleasure of the ego, these are like, for example, the hypocrites and the munafiqeen, and like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the surah Ma'un, wailul lil musallin. These people that they just pray just to show off. That's it. Like in the time of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they weren't worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They were just there to show other people. So that's what this is. What
Sorry, just interject. So are you saying, or correct me if I'm wrong, you're not saying all the non-objectives are for the pleasure of the ego, are you? Or is that what you're saying?
No, these are non-objective. These are wrong objectives.
Yeah. So if just taking your diagram, for example, if you look at the far end, yeah, it's got pleasure of the ego as the ultimate value, and then in the ends bit, you've got wrong objective to fulfill his needs or desires. So are you saying anyone that doesn't have the first two objectives, Allah, the pleasure of Allah, they automatically fall in the final section? Yeah.
Yeah. Because
okay, so we're saying, okay.
Yeah, go on.
No. So basically, we're saying all of those people, all non-objective worship, will take someone to the hellfire.
No. I'm not. The non-objective and the wrong objective is different.
Oh, good. That's what I'm trying to clarify. Okay.
Yeah, so that's why I've written here non-objectives. The difference between non-objective and wrong objective is non-objective. This person is worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah, or he might be worshipping for reward or paradise or fear of hell, whatever it is. Yeah, but he has another need as well from Allah, because through that worship. So he's worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for a need. Yeah, so for example, it could be like, I have a worldly problem. Yeah, so he comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that, to relieve him from that worldly problem, for example. So obviously he's not sincere in his worship, but it doesn't mean that this person is, obviously doomed for hell. I'm not saying that. These are the people these are like the hypocrites that have made their objectives wrong, completely wrong. They're not even worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are the people I'm talking about. These are the people going to go to hell, because they're not even, these are, most of them are like, they're just munafiqs anyway, that used to do this in the time of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for example. And even now you get these people, but so that's the difference between a wrong. So this one is like the path to hell, and this one is like the path to, this person is like, like when we show the mountain diagram and you got the non-objectives taking you away from the path, straight path, that's this one. So that's the difference. So So this is like, for example, these are like these people here, the first category, this is like, for example, the one who worships Allah, like he has the reality of the La ilaha illallah, this one here. These are like the awliya. And the second one, these are like the believers, Muslims. Obviously there's varying degrees of these, and they say La ilaha illallah. They say Allah is my God, but they have other gods as well. So they worship other gods as well. And this last one is that they don't even worship Allah, they just worship false gods only. So that is the difference between those three. So this I've actually, is that, so I've broken this down even further.
But yeah, sorry, I think what Majid is alluding to.
Yeah.
I mean, on the face of it, just by fulfilling the pleasure of the ego, it's not necessarily a wrong thing or taking to hellfire. I think what you just mentioned there would be quite good if you add that, to fulfilling or pleasuring the false god. That is quite crucial. And like Hawa is mentioned as a false god. Our own ego in Quran, isn't it? That maybe will explain better then. So yeah, I don't know if even if someone is waking because he wants to become a millionaire or support a family and doesn't think that I'm doing for sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm going to get a reward. That in itself is fulfilling his desire. But if he's doing halal, then there's nothing wrong, from the outset, is it?
No, sorry, sorry, I think I didn't clarify properly. What I meant was I was talking specifically in regards to the worship here. I'm not referring to the, because for example here I mentioned the family here. This is different, wealth, and that's different. But I was specifically referring to the worship when a person's, for example, praying, for example, and so this person here, what it is, his ultimate ends is just the dunya, a pleasure of the dunya. That's it. He has no kind of objective in the akhirah. He doesn't have any purpose in the akhirah. Nothing. He doesn't want anything in the akhirah. He doesn't. In fact, this person doesn't even probably believe. Yeah, he just made his goal. He's not even a believer. He's made his goal, this ego, and this fulfilling his nafs, and being happy, limited the life of this world. That's his end of all ends. That's it. I just want to please my nafs in this life. That's it. Like a shaitan, and that's why we say the path to hell, because this person is on a path to hell, because that's the shaitanic path, just to pleasure of the ego. That's it. He doesn't have any other objective. So he's basically all he's worried about is how can I fulfill my desire. So even through his worship, when he's praying, what he's doing is just fulfilling his desire, because through his worship he's becoming known to people, and that's his fulfilling his desire. That's all he's doing, fame and name. So then what I did was, so this is very important. It's important that we understand, we're clear on this, like what's the difference between non-objective and a wrong objective. Even when we do, for example, when we do the tariq halaqah ourselves, we should be clear on these things. Like non-objective, it doesn't mean that this person is on the path to hell. It's just that he's got other objectives as well as. So that's why when we, for example, when we do the zikr, like that's the purpose of getting rid of these non-objectives. So what I've done is I've broken this down even further. So the true worshipper of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is the person who only worships for Allah. And this person here is the conditional worshipper of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he worships Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but the worship is conditional. So for example, if he's granted Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala closeness or pleasure, then he will worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then that's his objective, the pleasure, the conditional thing, which whatever he gets, whatever he wants from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the third person is like a businessman, he's made his objective reward or paradise or stations. He's not really worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for Allah, but he's worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all these things. And the fourth person is like the slave. So he's worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of fear. So he's like a slave. Yeah. And the last one who's made his objective pleasure of the ego, he's a hypocrite. So these are the different categories of worshippers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So obviously the true worshipper of Allah. So the reason why I'm mentioning all this is because it's linked to the ultimate, the value, what we were talking about in terms of values and ends values, and etc. So but we don't need to mention all these things in the workshop because it's beyond the scope of what we're doing. We don't need to mention all these things. All we need to mention to them is you value worship, and don't know. That's all they need to understand. They won't we don't really need to know the details of this, unless someone asks and maybe wants to clarify further, that you can mention these things in more detail. So how does the ends value, how does it relate to the rights of Allah? Is through this, I just explained it. And then the rights of creation, compassion upon creation, is there's 4 types of people, again, in regards to compassion upon creation. So they're all valuing outwardly, they're all valuing the serving creation. So this, for example, these are the means values, and they're all valuing creation, but the ends values are all different. So for example, this person here whose ends value is service, this is, again, this is the station of khidmah, this is maqam, the maqam of khidmah. This is different. This is not a feeling. So this person doesn't have any other want, any other need except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because he's reached that maqam of service. So these are like this, again, like the friends of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then you have like the believers, and amongst the believers you have varying degrees of people. So for example, some people value creation, but they have other objectives, non-objectives. Again, non-objectives here, it doesn't mean this person is going to go to hell. It's that they have other things. For example, so this person here, the first one we mentioned, this is obviously, he's going to get great reward in the akhirah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to be a reward in the akhirah, and in the dunya he's going to get a reward as well. Different way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards that person. In the akhirah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to be his reward. This person here is a believer. Obviously, he's not like, so this is the actual service is this. The true service is this. Yeah, it's not nothing, not the other things. So this one, so even here, this is true service, true worship. The other ones are not true worship. This is true worship. This is the worship that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts, the true one. And this service, this is the actual service that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts. So that's why, for example, when we in the objectives of the course, the 4 objectives, giving preference to the command of Allah and compassion upon creation, they come at the end of the tazkiyah of purification, because once a person does his purification, that's when he reaches the station of these things, station of worshipping and service. Before he reaches that level, before that, even though although he's doing these things, you can't call it service as such, but he's still, alhamdulillah, he's still doing good deeds to help the creation, and he will get reward for it. But he will get rewarded in this life and the hereafter. So for example, I'll give you examples. So a person, for example, he wants to help the creation, but he has other needs. For example, he has needs of personal, satisfaction, like he gets happy as well. When he, for example, he has empathy, and that's driving him as well. That's his like ends value as well, like empathy and other things as well. So these are not bad things. These are good things as well, alhamdulillah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward him for that, because it's a good thing. And he in the hereafter he will be rewarded as well. But it's not the service. The point I'm trying to make is not sincerely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He has other needs as well attached to it, to that service. Yeah. So, and his ultimate ends value also, he will have other. He won't be purely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he might be doing it for reward and paradise. So this is like this is the believers and, Muslims, alhamdulillah. And we should have good opinion on all Muslims, that they all fall in this category. And, there's varying degrees of these people. They're not all the same. And then you have these people are, then I've done a difference here between the people that have non-objective as their ends value and objective. So the difference here is that the people that have non-objective as their value is that these people, for example, non-Muslims, they many people ask, like there's non-Muslims, they're doing all these good things, and but the reason why they're not going to get rewarded in the hereafter, because they're not doing it for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, doing it for the pleasure of the ego. So they'll get rewarded in this life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards these people in this life as well, that who do good to creation. But for example, they're doing it for example, their own personal gratification. For example, they might have empathy, or they want, they want to fulfill their own personal desires, or they have, they have feelings for creation, sympathy, and all these kind of things, values that they have. And it's for that purpose they're doing it. But they're not bad things. They're not bad, they're good values. yeah, and they're not bad values. You know, feeling sorry for someone is a good thing, but they're not doing it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for example, so these people, what happens is they get rewarded in this world as well. So for example, I'll give an example. You know, when you have, like, for example, we talk about, for example, UK, they have, you know, compassion upon creation in their system. You know, they help the people, they help the, you know, they look after the needs of the people, you know, and they have concern for them, etc., etc. And the reason why these governments are successful, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards them for this reason, because of that, because of their, you know, compassion that they do and the justice that they have. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala maintains their systems and their governments and sustain them because of this reason. So this is like an example where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually rewarding these people in this world as well. So, and then the last category is basically people, you know, obviously the end objective is wrong, and their ends value is completely wrong as well. So it's like, for example, this could be, for example, I'm, you know, showing off just for fame and name, completely for fame and name. That's it. Yeah, to please his ego. And you know, in the hadith, it's mentioned that, and this is the path to hellfire. You know, like people have the hypocrites and other people, shaitanic people. Yeah. So for example, you know, it comes in the hadith where, you know, 3 types of people, they'll be thrown into hell. And one was, for example, they were all serving creation, but they were all hypocrites. So one was, for example, teaching people. That's how he was serving the creation. One was giving money in charity, and the other one was, you know, doing jihad or political struggle. Yeah, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all of them, their intention was wrong, and that's why they're going to be thrown into hellfire. So this is these people. So again, you know, like I said, there's varying degrees and there's varying people, the levels of people in terms of, you know, but the true service is actually these people here. These are the people, none of them are, you know, really truly serving people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or doing khidmah. Because the true service is when you have no need or want at all. And that's actually, and through sacrificing your own desires, and that's actually when it becomes a spiritual act, and it fulfills a spiritual need of the person. So I hope that's clear. If I've confused anyone, sorry about that. If you don't understand everything, it doesn't really matter, as long as you understand the main things. That's the main thing, because you're not going to need to teach this anyway. It's just mainly for your own understanding and clarity. So the last thing I just wanted to mention was that the question is that what are the needs? What needs are the 4 objectives of the tariq in reference to? Yeah. Now, obviously, I just talked about the 4 objectives, and I mentioned that, you know, these are in relation to the spiritual needs, the 4 objectives. I did mention that. However, that's not 100% true. I'm going to mention this now, because the tariq is actually it's not in relation to the spiritual needs only. It's the spiritual path. It's a spiritual path, and in reality, what it is, true spirituality is achieved by through life balance. So that's when you have, you know, true spirituality. So it's not just the spiritual needs. The spiritual needs are actually emphasized, you know, more, but overtly they're more emphasized. But if you actually look at the 4 objectives, in the 3rd objective, compassion upon creation, you will actually find that compassion upon creation is actually compassion upon yourself as well. So this includes the rights of the body, mind, and heart as well. So that's included in there. So the actual spiritual path and the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala includes the rights of the body, mind, and heart. Yeah, but it doesn't mention that overtly. It just focuses more on the spiritual needs and the in relation to the purpose. But if a person pondered a bit more deeply, you will find that in there. Because if a person is not fulfilling the rights of the body, if he's not fulfilling the needs of the body and the mind, he can't get spirituality. Yeah. So like for example, the example I gave before of the person who was you know, the 3 men that came to the Prophet ﷺ, and one person said, one said I'll never sleep, another one said I'll never marry, and the person said I'll fast every day. These people cannot reach spirituality because they're violating the rights of the body. So that is actually in there as well, if you ponder over it a bit more. But obviously when we look at the values, we're in this workshop, the self-discovery, we're looking at values from a holistic point of view. So we're not just focusing on the spiritual needs. We're looking at the physical needs and the mind-related needs and the heart-related needs and even the desires. So we're asking the students to make values for themselves, choose values for themselves based on everything. So that's why the focus is on there as well, and it's overt as well. That makes sense. So this is something I just put together after the last session, because someone asked the question regarding spiritual needs. What is spiritual needs? So I just put that together. Again, it's not something that we're going to cover in the thingy, but just for your own personal benefit, inshallah. Inshallah, you can. But if there's any questions, I'll try to answer. You got Dr. Sharlam here as well. MashaAllah, he'll be able to answer it. But if there's anything that specifically you need to ask, and you got other stars as well. We've got Ustad Majid as well, and other stars here. I'm sure they can answer these questions much better than myself. So if there's any other questions, anyone has, regarding this, they can ask.